Hey there guys, in today's video I'm going to be going over all of the minute settings in OOTP, and there are a lot of them. So I will try to hit every single area I can think of, but if I happen to miss any, let me know and I will be happy to make a second video with anything I may have left out. So on your start screen you're going to see continue game, which if you've ever played an OOTP game on your current computer or have one saved, you will be able to boot it up from here. It will be your most recent one. Load game, which will show all of the games you currently have saved on your computer. New standard game, which will boot up a 2020 live game, which you can do in challenge mode or normal mode. And then it will give you the options of which leagues you want to play with if you'd like to do it with a live start or a shortened season. Now, to my understanding, live starts currently do not work and only work if you are to start it up in the middle of a season. It will give you live rosters updated by OOTP and conditions of the season, as well as statistics up to that point that reflect whatever day you begin the league on. We'll also have injuries, among other things. That's something you'll want to keep in mind for 22, but again, I don't think it actually works right now for OOTP 21. The shortened 60-day season, if you have this checked, will have your season be the 2020 season style, where it will begin on August or whenever it was, and you will have only 60 games in the season. The playoffs will be expanded, and I believe you also have your expanded rosters. To my knowledge, you also have updated player rankings as of this point, and yeah. And then, of course, you could type in the name of your league. If you hit start game, then you'll be able to choose a team if you would like to be in commissioner mode, and if you would like to have firing disabled if you are not in challenge mode. If you are in challenge mode, those options will not be available, just your choose team button. You can also start a historical game, which, again, you get the challenge mode pop up, so you can do no challenge mode or yes challenge mode. And then you get different settings. So in this one, you get to actually choose the year you start in. It can be any year in baseball history, and you go to the era you want, and then you select from the drop-down menu the year you actually want. If you import complete history, that means that all statistics from the entire MLB history up to that point will be included into your game. If you import real minor leagues, that means that you will get basically minor leagues. So if you want to have minor leagues disabled, then do not select this button, or I think it might create fictional minor leagues for the era instead and minor league players. And if you want to use random players from all eras, then you will have to select this button instead. I believe if you do this from a different point after creating the league, it's different. I'll get to that later. And from here, you can select which era or years you want to be included. So basically, if you're trying to play a fantasy style league with all players from MLB history coming in at a random time, you could do it like this. And here you can select your optimization with player ratings for single season replay or career play. What this essentially means is, are your players going to reflect what they did more over their career, or are they more likely to do what they did in a single season? So, for example, a one-hit wonder, a guy who was outstanding in one year, is going to have much better ratings with single season replay than career play. And a guy like Hank Aaron, who accumulated a ton of statistics over his entire career rather than just having one or two standout seasons, is going to look better from the career play option. When you go on to the next step here, it'll take a second to load. You get to choose which minor league levels you would like to have enabled for your league, and you could click whether or not you would like to require minor league rosters. You can also recalculate player ratings before each season, which will have players follow their career path, or you can let the OOTP engine take over, which would have players follow what they would have been if they did not improve after their first year in the major leagues, or alternatively, it will simply randomize them at that point. You can also expand the league as it did realistically, and hold an expansion draft when it expands. And you can also have the financial settings change as the league changes. So you will have inflation, free agency come around as you get to that point, and changes in free agency as the league evolves past that point. And then you get to, of course, adjust your scouting settings. So with historical, if you have recalc enabled, it will be 100% accurate. And you can select which rating scale to use. 1 to 5 will give you ratings from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These all, by the way, translate your basic ratings or the game's ratings to a system that represents them to you without being totally accurate, and of course being much more vague. 2 to 8 is essentially the same as 20 to 80, except there's no 0.5, so there's no 25, 35, 45. This is probably actually the closest thing to the Major League Scouting, as it would be 20 to 80, except they only have a 55 and a 45 rating. There is nothing between 60 and 70, 70 and 80, so there's no 65, 75, there's no 35, 25, and there's nothing above 80. 1 to 20 has ratings between 1 and 20, and 1 to 10 has ratings between 1 and 10. 1 to 100 has ratings between 1 and 100, and there are no increments. It's just every single number. This is by far the most accurate rating system of them all in terms of giving you an idea of how good a player is. For play, I would recommend either sticking to 20 to 80 if you're more of a traditionalist, or that's just the style you want to go with, or 1 to 100. I know there's a lot of leagues, particularly online leagues, that use some of these more obscure rating scales, but I generally would not recommend them, especially for less experienced players, because they can get a little bit weird and confusing. Most of the time you want to disable fictional pictures, as they'll slow your computer down, but if you really want a good feel for what your players are, you might want to enable them. All players will mean that every time a player is created, it will give them a picture. This will slow your computer down a lot if you do not have a more powerful model, especially. It really creates a large number of things that you're going to have to load. And Major League players will only create player pictures as they are promoted to the MLB, or maybe it's as they're put on the 40-man roster. I'm pretty sure it's promoted to MLB, but I could be wrong there. It could be 40-man roster based. And of course, no fictional pictures means that pictures will not be generated for anyone who did not actually exist. With coaches, once again, you can have either all coaches, scouts, and managers receive fictional pictures, or none of them. And you can have either normal, facegen, black and white, which is of course just black and white, or sepia, which I actually have no idea what that does. So if anyone actually has used the sepia facegen mode before, you can leave a comment in the chat for everyone else to understand, because not even I know. And then, of course, you get to choose your team here. You get to select commissioner mode. It cannot be fired if you would like to play in such a mode. And I believe I selected challenge mode, so I don't know exactly why it's letting me choose those options. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, they shouldn't be available. I guess I didn't choose challenge mode. They won't be available if you do select challenge mode. Once again, you also get to choose the name of your save. You get to select how often it autosaves. If you have a reliable computer, once a year is probably fine. But if you're worried about your computer crashing, or you have a problem with the resizing glitch, which is essentially, for those who do not know, a glitch where if you resize OOTP, it has a good chance of crashing, or misrendering, I should say, then you might want to switch it to once a month or once a week. I would really not recommend daily autosaves, because that's going to slow you down a whole bunch. And over here, you will see a list of teams, Major League teams, that exist in this era. So if you're expecting to see, say, the Miami Marlins in a 1920s save, they are not going to be there. And you can actually choose which league you want to control here. So if there's more than one league, you can click this drop-down menu and then select the one that you want to go with. I'm going to hit the cancel button here, which will delete the league, since I don't actually want to play this, but you would normally click the start game button in order to get your game going there. Now, one of the coolest things you can do is a custom game, which I'll get to in a minute. So there's also a quick start game, which will allow you to pull up a game that if you have a quick start of, then you can get it here. Quick starts can be downloaded from other players, or you can save them yourself, which is an option I will get to later as well. You just select the one that you want to pull up, and then it will create a game based on whatever the quick start is. Importing an OOTP 20 game will show you your games from Out of the Park Baseball 20, and then you can choose the one that you want to bring into 21. So you would click this, go into Save Games, and I think you go to .lg. Nope, you'd scroll down and then select the league that you want to import. So these are all my OOTP 21 games, I believe, actually. Some of them are deleted, so I'm not sure why they're still there. I'm gonna hit this. Nope, that's not it. Okay. Historical exhibition mode will allow you to choose two teams from any era and then just play them in games. So if you're wondering, well, what does OOTP think this team would do against this team? Then you could try it out here. I don't personally think this is 100% reflective or really even 80 or 90% reflective of what would actually happen in real life, especially for teams further out than modern era. But it's a pretty cool thing if you just want to see or get a feel for how certain players work and how certain eras look. And now on to custom games, which I think are one of the coolest things you can do with OTP. So you can also have a challenge mode here. I'm not going to enable this for the time being. And then you get a whole bunch of options available. So this advanced mode down here will essentially open up all the available settings into the settings mode that I will get to later. But here you will have your create world league, create fictional league, or create historic league. So this is once again your modern MLB league, your historical MLB league, or a league that doesn't actually exist, which is pretty cool. I think this is one of the more intriguing options. So we're going to go to this. We want to start in our... Wait, did I select historical by accident? Yeah, I did. Okay, we want to do fictional. So you get to choose how many teams you want. On the right here are default settings that you can select from different leagues. They have different league setups, and then it will give you that. So you can select the Nippon League to play from the Japanese style, the KBO to play the KBO's single league with 10 teams in it. You can play the Chinese Professional League, and then, of course, there are other settings as well. Or you can select your own. So you can click a free set up here as well, or you can do you can set the leagues yourself. You can only have up to 2 sub-leagues as of now, but that might change in the future. You can have up to a ridiculously large number of 50 divisions in each sub-league, and up to probably 50 teams in each division. And yep, that's how it is. I'd imagine playing anywhere near that many teams is going to really slow your computer, but who knows? If you select any of these settings, by the way, this will also import the team logos and names. It will not import players, but it will import logos and names if you were to choose one of those settings. But we're going to go on without doing that. So right here, you get to choose what country you want your league based in. So you can literally choose any country that OOTP has on this list. I think they have literally every country in the world, although I could be wrong about that. You could choose which region in the country you are selecting for them to be based. If you have it based in a specific region, you can name your league, you can create an abbreviation for it, and then you select the league level. So how advanced is your league? You can choose Major League, any of the minor leagues, an independent league, an international league, a college league, or even a high school league if you so desire, which could be a pretty interesting play style. You get to choose how many minor leagues your league has, so I'd imagine this is going to be different if you go, to different levels. Although international leagues, of course, have minor leagues available. Independent leagues do not, apparently. And yeah, neither do college or high school. You can name your sub-leagues and abbreviate them as well. So that would be, for example, American League and AL. You get to name your divisions, which generally you're just going to leave East and West, but you could put them at something else. And you can name all your teams, give them a location, and select the nation they're in as well. You can abbreviate them and pretty much everything else you want to do. You can choose which year you want your settings to be from. So this is basically, do you want to play a historical game or do you want to play a modern game? And if you're playing a historical game, you could select this setting to adjust settings to whatever the league thing is at that point. Holding an inaugural fantasy draft will allow you to select your players from a pool in a draft style play rather than getting stuck with a random set of players. So if you would like to be able to choose your team, then you would click this button. But if you don't care what your team looks like at the start, or you just want your players randomized, or you don't want to go through an extensive fantasy style draft, you unclick that. And I will mention, if you have prospects included, this will include all minor leagues. So it can get a little bit long to draft all the meaningful players. If you're actually looking to create a team, you need to go out at least 50 to 100 rounds with this. And then, of course, you could schedule what time of year is your league playing. Are we starting in April? Are we going to start in September? And how long is a typical series? 1 game up to 5 games. Again, we have our scouting accuracy, and here you get to set to whatever you want. I believe if you are playing a live game or in challenge mode, you can only change it between normal and low. You can also change your rating system, of course. And once again, your pictures option. Automatic evolution of the league would essentially mean are rule changes happening that you are not in control of. So the league might change if designated hitters are allowed in a certain league, or what the roster size is, or expand, or other rules, or trading rules, or things along those lines. And then you once again choose your team. This is not too different from the historical mode. And if you go into the advanced mode here, this is essentially what the settings look like. You get to create the settings before you actually create the league here. So there's a lot of cool things you can do from the settings. If you're looking to take control of your league, I definitely recommend using the advanced mode once you learn about the settings a little bit more. But in the meantime, I'm going to cancel because we don't really want to go through this. Next, I'm just going to hop into a game here and we're going to take a look at some settings. So first, we're going to head to global settings. These apply to all leagues, not just yours. If you have a scouting system enabled, that means that scouts will affect how accurate ratings are and whatever. If you have this disabled, then you just get 100% accurate ratings on all players. So it would essentially be like having a 100% accurate setting right there on the scouting accuracy, except you wouldn't even have to hire a scout. Well, you couldn't hire a scout, I should say. You could change your rating scale from here. I've already explained them. Your overall rating is a little bit different. Stars will be in 10 different values. You can have up from half a star to 5 stars, and you can have values of half or whole stars. Higher stars means your overall rating is better, and lower stars means it's worse. I don't think overall and potential ratings are necessarily the best way to value a player in terms of the overall. I would recommend looking at them individually. If you don't want to have an overall rating displayed, you could select this. And if you'd prefer values of 20 to 80, which would essentially be the default rating scale, you can do so. Or if you want increments of 5, that actually is the default rating scale. This would be essentially the 1 to 100 system, but only values from 20 to 80. Ratings above maximum. So if you have players that are, for example, 80 grade contact, but they're actually 90 grade contact, if you enable this, you will be able to see that. The relative rating system means that it will adjust what your ratings displayed are to whatever it is. So if you're wondering how much better a guy is at the major league level compared to his peers, you'd have this enabled. If you have this disabled or set to a different, if I'll do set to a different league first. If you have this set to a different league, then it will display ratings relative to that league instead. So if you set it to a AAA league, for example, then the average AAA league player will become the default and all ratings will be adjusted accordingly. If you disable this setting, then it will just show the pure ratings of your players completely unadjusted to leagues. Overall ratings based on all players means that essentially your average player is going to be a 50 and everyone else is going to be above or below that depending on how it is. So this is just relativity stuff here. I personally like having this disabled and just being able to look at pure players, but of course that's going to be up to you, and early on it is usually better if you have this enabled to Major League Baseball. You do want to use a complete coaching system. Well, okay, you don't necessarily want to use a coaching system, but you can disable it from the here if you would like. That would completely remove coaching and from the player development equation. Owner goals, if you have them enabled, you can complete them, which will make your owner more happy with you, which will make him more likely to have positive effects on your franchise and give you a larger budget, among other things. If you have it disabled, then that's just removed from the system. If you have this enabled, then you control your lineup even if you are a GM only user. So if you have a manager, you have the ability to completely override him. I think you should enable this setting. It's very unrealistic for managers to actually be able to override their GM's decisions, as their job is literally on the line. And if they decide to go against their GM, they could lose it. The autosave function, as I talked about earlier, is available here. So if you want to change at any point in your save, you can do so. You can autosave box scores. If you're looking to speed up a league and play out well into the future, you want to set this to none. If you don't really care what other leagues look like, you can set this to human only, or human leagues, or essentially whatever. I don't generally recommend storing minor leagues, so I would set it just to all major leagues. But that is, again, up to you. It will just help your computer run a little bit faster if you change that. So the win probability averaged graphs are taking into account how likely your team is to win, assuming both teams are average at any given point in the game. So if you go into a box score after a game, then they will show up in the top along with big events that happen during the game. I'm not sure exactly what this setting does, delay win probability graph generation. I think this means, are you generating it during the game or are you generating it after the game? And I don't see any reason to turn that on to no. So I would just leave this setting as it is. Game logs are essentially going to be the same thing as box scores, I believe. Oh, these are recaps. Okay, so this would be box scores here. Recaps would be what events happened on that day. Replays are literally the entire game simulation where you can go back and watch it again. This is definitely going to eat up a whole bunch of memory on your computer if you have it enabled. I would strongly recommend you don't do that. It looks like this setting can't be changed even if you have commissioner mode enabled, so I'm not sure exactly why it's there. Highlights are, again, the biggest moments from a game. So if you want to have those appear in your inbox, then you would enable this for whatever leagues you want it to be from. 3D movements are a part of your 3D generation. I don't know why this is enabled. This is, yeah, this is going to eat up a lot of memory. If you want your league to move faster, setting this to none is going to make it go a lot quicker. News logs are the things that get sent to your inbox, I believe. Injury logs also get sent to your inbox, and transaction logs also get sent to your inbox. The top prospects list. So this is how often the prospects list is going to change. I believe it actually updates 3 times a year, once at the beginning of the season, once in the middle, and once at the end. but dynamic would make it just continually update. So as prospects graduate, they leave the list. And as new prospects come in, they go on. As prospects improve, they gain settings. And if they decline, then they'll lose status. Preseason's predictions are essentially the AI's guess of how well each team is going to do based on the quality of their players. Storylines could be a little bit annoying. You can have guys go to India, which can harm their personality. You can have guys get hurt by mowing over their foot or falling off a roof. But there are also some good storylines. For example, a charity storyline that you get every now and then, which can actually improve your market size and fan loyalty, hugely effective on your franchise. I think overall they add a little bit of spice to the game, but if you are worried about risk to your players, I would disable them. The financial coefficient, to the best of my knowledge, is essentially inflation. So if you set this to 2, money will be worth half as much. You'll have twice as much money available, and players will be twice as expensive. The currency symbol is pretty self-explanatory. What do you want your symbol to be? You can change it to other units as well. Players and facegen. So for injuries over here, you can actually disable injuries. If you don't click this, players will not get hurt. The injury frequency is how likely a player is to get injured. So this is essentially a multiplier effect upon a player's individual injury rating. And you can change it depending on how much you would like players to get hurt. Hiding injury rating will make it so that you can't see if a player is fragile, wrecked, normal, injury prone, durable, or Iron Man. Suspensions, again, you can enable or disable. That's pretty self-explanatory as well. And suspension frequency, also self-explanatory, just how often you want your players to be suspended. Personality ratings are going to affect a lot of things in the game, actually, from development to clubhouse interactions to how much they're going to demand. I think they play a pretty big part in the game, but if you don't want to deal with that hassle and just worry about players as players, you might want to disable the system here. Showing the personality ratings on the profile page will show each individual rating except for, I believe, controversy, handle critics, handle success, and handle failure. So if it's above a certain point, then it'll show up as high. If it's below a certain point, it'll show up as low. If it's somewhere in the middle, it won't show up. The morale system is how happy your players are based on their performance and the quality of leaders in your dugout, although there are some negative effects as well. If you're losing games, that'll cause it to be dragged down. If you have bad personalities, that'll cause it to be dragged down as well. The chemistry system is basically the same thing. Actually, that is the chemistry system. The morale system is how happy your player is. So based on their performance, how well the team is doing, and how good the chemistry is, they will develop a certain level of happiness that will affect their performance, their development, and how much they would demand in a contract. Player nicknames also pretty self-explanatory. That's available in the editor. You can see it for both Commissioner mode and normal mode. These settings will affect how quickly players develop, so it's essentially a multiplier effect on how fast you are coming around, and how quickly players age, so how fast they decline, another multiplier effect. The talent change randomness is how likely a player is to all of a sudden improve a whole bunch or drop off a huge amount, or just change in general. Higher means that you're more likely to have change, lower means you're less likely to have players change. So if you want random half-star potential guys suddenly becoming superstars, you might set this to 200. And of course, that causes your top tier players to bust more frequently as well. Disabling player development means that players do not change their ratings at all. You just have the same guys over and over for eternity. Disabling development for specifically draft eligible players means that once you get the draft pool available, players will not change. So you have your pool set from the moment it's available. Deleting those who never reached the majors means that all minor leaguers and others who did not play in the major leagues will have their profiles deleted upon retirement. that really speeds up your game. Unless you really care about those tiny guys who literally never made it, I strongly recommend enabling this setting to speed up your game. And keeping splits will show how a player did versus lefties and righties. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can decide what leagues you want to keep them for. Keeping career fielding stats, again, pretty self-explanatory. And postseason stats as well, you can enable where you would like that. Player face gen. So this is what we were seeing earlier from the league creation setting. And you can update players' face gen, apparently. Let's see what this is. I see. So if they're happy, they're more likely to smile, basically. If they become more grouchy, then there will be more grouchy looking. Coach face gen is, again, a setting we saw earlier. And face gen color mode, you can do black and white or sepia. I want to see what sepia looks like. We're checking it out. I don't see the difference. Maybe it's a slight coloring change or something. Or maybe it's smoother. You can have background if you like, but I generally think this is a little bit distracting, so I would definitely have this disabled. If you do not want player profile pictures to come in, so this would mean no players, even live players, get pictures, you would disable this setting. This is something that you would probably do as you're setting up the league, not as you've already created it. But if you want to change your mind later, you can do this. This is probably most useful in historical mode. This is the same thing, face gen photos. If you don't want to load face gen, you would just disable this. If you want away uniforms on, so if you care what your guys look like, you can enable this. If you are not playing games manually, you should just disable this as it'll slightly improve your game speed. And baseball cards, unless you really, really care about them, I would disable this because it takes a long time to generate them and they do slow your game down. If you want to check out the beard settings, you can enable the beard settings. For the AI settings, you can adjust your trade difficulty. So if you want to have a harder game or an easier game, you can change it here. Generally, I don't think this actually has much effect on the trade difficulty. I found that from very easy to very hard, there's only a very, very small difference in how difficult it is to build a team. Trading preference, so who is the AI going to value more? Are they more likely to favor veterans or prospects? If you set it to prospects, the trade value for prospects is going to increase. The trade value for guys on major league rosters is going to decrease, and vice versa for the veterans. The ratings weight, current year stat weight, previous year stat weight, and 2 years ago stat weight is essentially how the AI values players. So generally speaking, you want the ratings weight to be at least 2/3 of the overall value because the AI will be very easy to abuse if it's much higher. You can just have guys with ridiculous statistics and then trade them away even if they suck. This, of course, has to add up to 100%, but you could change this however you like to fit your trade preferences. And the lineup selection will determine whether the AI is more likely to use splits, basically. So are we going to take advantage of the fact that we have a first baseman who hits really well but only against lefties, and then a guy who doesn't hit so well but actually hits righties better? I don't really know what the almanac does. That's definitely more code-based, so I'm not really too proficient in that. If you have an online league, you can enable this here. So this is pretty cool setting. There's a lot of things you can mess around with. Entering different things, how frequently you're simulating games, which I believe it does automatically, maybe, not exactly sure. Actually, I'm going to bet it doesn't do it automatically, but it would be cool if it did. But you can essentially just input different information about your league here. I've never actually used this myself as I have yet to run an online league. Not sure exactly anything about the database. I would just ignore that. For the leagues and teams, if you want to change a team's name or change league name or division name or location, you can do that. League reputation is going to amount to money. How much money do you have to work with? I believe 0, you have no money, but I could be wrong, or it could be a very small amount. With a 10, you have a major league amount of money. If you are looking to create an affiliate league, you can do so here. So if we want the MLB to be affiliate to the Nippon League, which essentially is minor leagues, you could do that. And if you want a league abbreviation, you can set it here, which should be MLB. Oh wait, it's up here. I see. Not exactly sure what these two are. I think I would just focus on these for the top level. And of course, you can use this drop-down menu to select all. Oh no, you can choose which level your actual league is. So if you want the major leagues to be a lower level. In the rules, you can enable designated hitter. This is exactly what it sounds like. If you want to have a designated hitter in the National League, you can enable it. If you want to get rid of the American League designated hitter, you can disable it here. If you want to enable the National League hitter and disable the American League hitter, you could do that too. The minimum batters faced, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the minimum batters faced rule that the major leagues implemented in 2020. You can have it between 1 and 4. Modified extra innings. So do you want runners on second base in extra inning games? The active roster size is how many players you can have on your normal active roster. Secondary roster size is the 40-man, and expanded roster size is how many players are coming up in September call-ups. And here we have postseason roster rules, which would essentially revert you back to the 26-man roster for the playoffs rather than being able to continue with 28 at September. Postseason roster eligibility determines who can be on a playoff roster. The international complex size is how many players are in your international complex. Your international complex will hold all international amateur signees and scouting discoveries as well. How high does this go? You can have up to 200 players maximum there. The default is 50. Your spring training roster is, of course, how many players you can have in spring training. If you want to set a player age minimum, that would be how old do you have to be to enter the major league. So if you want to, say, protect young players from being immediately brought up to the major leagues and having their careers injured, or you want to manipulate service time, you can set this to 21, or really any age. If you want guys who are 40 plus in your league, like a seniors league or something, you can do that. If you want an age maximum, so if you're past a certain age, then guess what? You're out. You have to go to a different league. You can do that as well. So if we don't want players to play past 33, we can set the maximum there. If you want to limit the number of non-American players on your roster, you can do so here. You can do this for other things too. I know a lot of the international leagues have limits so that you can't just get a whole bunch of former MLB players on your team and then cruise through to a championship. The waiver period is how long a guy has to be on waivers before he can be removed. The DFA period is how long a guy has to be on or designated for assignment before he clears waivers and can be demoted and removed from the 40-man roster subsequently. The batter injured list length is how long a batter has to be on the injured list once placed there after receiving an injury before he can come back off. The pitcher list injured list length is the same thing, but for pitchers. How long does a pitcher have to be on the injured list after getting injured and placed on the injured list before he can come off and play for your team again? Minor league option years. So is there a limit on how many times you can send a guy to the minor leagues? And if you have this disabled, then you can send them as much as you like. The disable right to refuse minor league assignment. So some older players will get really cocky and refuse to go down to the minors no matter how bad they are or how poorly they're performing. If you enable this setting, that means that they do not have the ability to do so and will have to get demoted, period. Allow incomplete minor league roster, ghost players. So if you have less than 25 players on a minor league roster, essentially fictional players will fill in that aren't a part of your organization, but will fill the hole and let the team play normally. I recommend setting this unless you're actively managing your farm system so you don't accidentally have guys get hurt or whatever, and then your players are getting overwhelmed, which will hinder their development because you don't have 25 guys on the roster. This setting will decide who is starting at each minor league level. You almost always want to have this based on your potential rating because, well, if you have it based on your current rating, you could have some washed up 28-year-old scrub starting over your superstar 19-year-old hyper prospect guy. Blocking fictional players from reaching the majors, I don't see why you would ever enable this, but if you're just sticking with major leaguers, you would click that setting. If you want a Rule 5 draft, or you don't want a Rule 5 draft, I should say, you can just click this, and you can change the date it happens from here, of course, by month, date, and year. So if you want to disable trading and make it impossible to exchange players with other teams, you would click that setting right there. A trade deadline, if you have it enabled, or you can, there's no way to disable the trade deadline, it seems, but you can set it to after the season, in which case I believe it doesn't do anything. The trade deadline is the point at which you can no longer trade your players to other teams until the end of the regular season. Allowing trades with other major leagues means that you could trade with other major leagues, so like international leagues such as the Nippon League, I believe would work, but it would primarily be used in fictional leagues where you have multiple major league levels. The 10-5 rule is guys with this clause in their contract or who have been on a team for a really long time, I think it's 10 plus years, have the right to veto trades, so you essentially can't trade them, period. They will never not waive this clause in OOTP, to the best of my knowledge at least. Allowing trading of injured players who have been out for more than 7 days, I recommend enabling this setting. It's realistic and it improves gameplay a lot. It can be abused a little bit, but it's not super problematic. And allowing waiver trades after the deadline. So I'm sure you guys remember a time not too long ago when you could waive players after the trade deadline and exchange less valuable guys. Allowing draft pick trading will allow you to exchange draft picks, exactly what it sounds like. So for the amateur draft, you can give up your first through 35th or 40th pick, or however many rounds you have the draft set to. The AI trading frequency will determine how often the AI will be making trades and proposing offers to you. I don't recommend fiddling with this as it will interfere with your league's effectiveness and the competitivity, I can't say the word, competitivity or something like that of the AI teams. If you don't want an amateur draft, you can disable this setting right here. You can disable the automatic creation of free agents, which would, I believe that means that you wouldn't get guys from just out of nowhere in your free agent pool. The amateur draft date you can change to be whatever you like. You can change the number of rounds to essentially whatever you like. There's a huge number of options. You're generally going to fiddle with this more in historical leagues as there are a ridiculously large number of drafts rounds and you generally will want to reduce it. You want to produce more than a couple of rounds extra upon the of players upon the number of rounds in the draft. So I'll set this to 40 provisionally. I would recommend producing about 20% more players than you have draft rounds so the quality doesn't get too bad too fast. The target percentage is how much the AI wants to take these certain players from junior colleges and high schools. And the reveal date is when the draft pool will be set in stone. Enabling advanced draftee signing bonus would mean that you can actually pay your top draft picks a signing bonus to enter your roster. So this is realistic. It's what it is. The slot baseline is essentially what the average cost is to sign a draftee. And the number of rounds to negotiate is the set number of rounds where a player is essentially slotted in to make money. Allowing major league deals for draft picks means that you can sign your draft picks to a major league deal. You almost never want to have this enabled because draft picks are almost never ready for the major leagues. Even your best of the best usually need at least a couple of seasons in the minors. Even in historical games, a vast majority of players still need time in the minors to develop. Expansion teams draft first will allow new teams to draft before you do to get the higher end talent. If you want to import a new setting factor, so for example, if you want to play with 1970 settings, you can do it from here. If you want to adjust financial values, you can do it with this setting. So you can inflate the league, deflate the league, whatever you want. And you have basic information on the league's financial settings from here. You can change the attendance baseline, which is essentially the average number of players or fans who are going to a game, and the price baseline, which is how much an average ticket costs. If you don't want teams to be able to change the price from the baseline, you can click this setting. And the visiting team's gate share is, of course, how much a visiting team makes from gate revenue. The financial system, if you do not want players making money, you just disable this and then nobody costs anything. You sign free agents completely free, and players do not have control of their money. Inflation is how much the league will inflate every year. So you can have from 10% deflation to 15% inflation with money. Realistically, you should actually be setting this from probably negative 2% to about 6% if you want changes, but it's up to you. If you want reserve clause error of rules, you can enable that right there. So that's basically there is no free agency system. And this is the minimum service days for 1 year. You can change this if you want to delay how long it takes for players to reach free agency or increase or get their service clock started, I should say, or decrease it if you want a lower bar for that first year of service clock. This is how long it takes a player to reach free agency, this year system right here. If you want to be able to post players for other leagues to buy at whatever cost, and then you receive a fee, you can enable the posting system. You generally don't want to do this for the highest level leagues because it doesn't make sense. The maximum posting fee is how much you can receive for your player being signed from another team. Allowing free agents from other leagues means that other leagues can bring free agents into yours, and resetting the time for free agents signed from other leagues. So if you sign a reliever to a 2-year contract from the KBO and he played 10 years in the KBO, he's still starting at his first year service time for you. So once his 2-year contract is over, he's got a year left of pre-arbitration and then 3 years of arbitration before he hits free agency. The qualifying offer is the qualifying offer. You can change which version it is, and if you want more information on these, you can read into the various versions. But basically, there are 2 versions of players, one who signs a certain value contract, and if you get a qualifying offer and sign below that value, then you're the second version. I believe you have a first round or a second round draft pick transferred over to you from the team that signs the player if you had a player decline a QO with this system. I think with this, all players who receive a QO are attached to a first round pick. So if you sign a player, you lose your first round draft pick to the team that gave the QO up. This system, to the best of my knowledge, is where players you get a first round draft pick compensation for good players, or a second round draft pick compensation for players who sign below $50 million total salary, and you only sacrifice a third round draft pick to sign a player with a QO. The cash compensation is basically you get paid if your player declines a qualifying offer by the team that signs them. The maximum of 1 career qualifying offer means, for example, players like Marcell Ozuna. He's been offered a QO. He declined it. Now he can't take another he can't be offered another qualifying offer. Allowing players to leave your league means that if a guy wants to go to, for example, the NPB from the MLB, he can do so. And allowing contract opt-outs is essentially a contract clause. It allows players to exercise an option that allows them to leave their contract at any point, or at the specific point of where the opt-out is. The minimum buyout amount is the minimum price that it takes for a team option. I recommend setting this to 0% as it's the most realistic. And allowing players to be purchased from other leagues means that other leagues can literally just buy your player directly for however the money is, and then they get control of them. The minimum service years for arbitration is pretty self-explanatory. It's the number of service years you need before you hit arbitration. You can set up to a minimum of 1 year before free agency. The Super 2 deadline is, so Super 2 players are the guys with the most service time from a arbitrate or pre-arbitration 3 class. They get to go into an extra year of arbitration. So they get arbitration in what would be their 3rd year of pre-arbitration, and then they get their 3 normal years of arbitration as well. You could set this so that no Super 2 players exist. So in other words, everyone just follows the normal line. The minimum service years before minor league free agency is how long a guy has to be in your system before he can become a free agent as a minor league player. If a player is on a 40-man roster, they do not become a minor league free agent. The media contract baseline is how much money your team brings in from the media every year, and the media contract being fixed means that every team receives the same media income, or you can base it on market size, so the richer teams get even wealthier with that system. The local media contract baseline is how much you're getting from local media. This will, of course, change based on market size. Merchandising-based revenue is also based on your local team, or it will change based on market size and other things. Team owner controlling your budget. That basically means that your owner can set a budget based on how happy he is with you, how well your team is performing lately, and how much money you've been making. Or you could just have it set on your revenue if you change this setting where you have as much money to spend as you make. So revenue sharing is where you can essentially force the Yankees to pay the Athletics if you want, or the Rays, or the Marlins. Or you can just have a luxury tax where if you go past a certain point, then you have to pay whatever money, or you can set no revenue sharing, so there is no luxury tax. This means that if you go over the luxury tax, what is your fee? This is 170%, or this is where the luxury tax is set, 170% of the average payroll. So that would be, if you exceed whatever the luxury tax is, then you have to pay whatever the soft cap is, 25%, which would be 25% of the total amount that you went over the minimum payroll. The cash maximum is how much cash a team can start with at the beginning of a year, essentially. So if it's usually $10 million, if you go past that, you can get some really ridiculous amounts if you attempt to build it up. The player development baseline is the minimum the minimum amount that you can spend, or the average amount that you can put into player development. You can go up to $36 million, I believe, and as low as 4 million, something like that, 6 million. Oh, I see. You can go up to 3 times as high and go down up to half as low. And it's true of the scouting budget as well. So the limits are 3 times as high as whatever you set for the baseline and twice as low for the minimum. The coach salaries are, again, the average coach cost. You can pay up to 3 times as high and up to 2 times or half as low, I'm guessing. And then, of course, these salaries are essentially what you're expecting your average annual value to be for each player. You can change the minimum player salary here if you want, and of course adjust these based on what you want your players to be. You can decrease the maximum years value of, or the maximum years you can sign a player to. And if you want to disable extensions, so in other words, make it impossible to extend your players and force them to go to free agency before you can give them another contract, you can enable that setting there. If you want a salary cap, you can set it at this point, which would set a maximum amount of money that players can, or teams can spend. The automatic evolution of your league allows the settings in this area to happen. So you can expand automatically, change your active roster size, change the designated hitter availability. Can it be enabled in leagues that don't have it or disabled in leagues that have it? You can increase or decrease the amount of pitching and hitting, which is essentially the quality of pitchers and hitters. Teams can relocate. 40-man roster size can change. Minimum free agent service time can change, so you can become a free agent in 5 years or increase to 7. 2020 to 2021 rule changes can be adjusted, so that would be your minimum batter rule and such. The team nicknames can change. Your injured list length can change, and again, I already talked about the offense. So you can change league names if you want, or award names, and you can disable them if you like. From here, most valuable player award goes out to the best player in the league. I don't know how it's calculated for any of these awards. Cy Young award is for the best pitcher. Reliever of the year is for the best relief pitcher. Rookie of the year is for the best rookie. The Platinum Stick is the best hitter at each position. Gold Glove is best fielder. And Manager of the Year is for usually just the manager on the best team. AI voting means that you do not, if you disable this, you get to select things yourself. If not, you just have a 1 out of 30 or whatever, how many teams you have in your league influence. If you have this disabled, then you get to select the award winners manually. If you enable Hall of Fame voting, that means that players can make it into the Hall of Fame, which is essentially just a cool aesthetic thing. And if you enable disable the AI Hall of Fame voting, that means you get to select your Hall of Famers handpicked as well. The Hall of Fame reveal date you set yourself. You can force the reveal date to be on a certain day of the week if you want. None, of course, makes it not force revealed on the date. It'll just be on whatever date. The voting period length is how long before the reveal date you get to start voting on Hall of Famers. The waiting period to induction is how long after retirement you have to wait before you can be considered eligible for Hall of Fame voting. The years on ballot is the maximum number of years you can be on the Hall of Fame ballot before you are rendered ineligible. And the minimum service years is the number of years you have to play in the major leagues before you can be considered eligible for the Hall of Fame ballot. The induction threshold percentage is how much of the vote you need to be inducted as a Hall of Famer, and the drop players below percentage X is how low you have to receive of the vote in order to be knocked off the Hall of Fame ballot. The maximum votes per ballot is how many players each Hall of Fame voter can vote for. And the milestones are essentially just, oh cool, I have reached this point, that's cool. Rainouts, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you disable this, player or games will not be rained out. If you change the number of games per team, that will change the number of games you play every year. The start date is the date every year you start, and you can force the start date to be on a certain weekday if you want. You can disable the setting if you don't want that. You can auto adjust the date if matching. I'm not sure exactly what this means, but I think this basically means that the schedule adjusts with the league. So I would recommend having this on at all times, since if your league changes at all, this will make it so your schedule doesn't go screwy. The typical series length is how long your normal series is. We talked about that setting already. Your schedule balance, I'm not exactly sure what this is. I think it means that you play tougher teams if you're a better team and worse teams if you're a worse team. I would not recommend using that. Interleague play, so your sub-leagues can play each other. So the American League and National League play games against each other rather than just in the World Series. Spring training, you can disable if you want, and you can select how long it goes on for. You can also disable the All-Star game if you like, and you can manually hold it as well, in which case you would actually have to select the date yourself. The All-Star game location, if you want it to decide home field advantage for the World Series, you can. This was a thing recently. Yeah, it's not something I'd recommend, but you can do it if you want. And you can disable humans being able to vote for all-stars, so essentially that would make the AI have complete control. And the influence of popularity is how much popularity is going to affect who the all-star vote getters are. The all-star roster size is how many players make each league's all-star team. You can disable forcing teams to be represented as the all-star game. So as you probably know, every team has to have at least one player at the all-star game. If you disable that, then it's just the best players and most popular players. You can disable the use of the designated hitter in the all-star game. You can have an all-star prospects game, which is basically the best prospects having an all-star game. And the number of this is, yeah, when the prospects all-star game is relative to the real all-star game. And the format is, you can do the United States versus the world, which is pretty interesting, or by sub-league, so American League versus National League. And you can disable the all-star home run challenge if you want, or you can leave it enabled. And again, you can adjust the date relative to the all-star game that it is held. You can disable the playoffs if you like. You can also disable tiebreaker games, which would mean that I believe it's the team with the best in-division record if you're breaking a division title, in league record if you're breaking a wild card title, and then run differential. I don't remember what it is after that. It's probably like home winning percentage or something. Alternating home field for the final playoffs between sub-leagues, so that would mean I believe you would go back and forth between where you're playing each game. So you'd play a game at home and then a game on the road and then a game at home, but I'm not certain about that either. Using custom playoffs means that you can change up the playoff format however you like. It's a pretty interesting system if you like to change it up. You can come in here and change the seeding system. And you can also change the start dates. So if you want the leagues to start on the same day, you can disable this setting here. And if you don't want the dates to be fixed, then you can change them up there. For the players, you can set the minimum age players are created at and the maximum age they're created at if you want to change that by default. If you want to generate international amateur free agents, you can change it from none to a few to 30, which is one for each team, to more to a lot. I recommend doing more or a lot as that's the most realistic option. The cap is how much you have to spend on international amateur free agents, and of course the date is when they become available. You can change the number of players who your scout discovers every year, the number of international free agents there are every year, and the number of independent league free agents there are as well. Over here, you can automatically import creation modifiers, so that would change the player quality based on historical development. If you're in a live league, there's really no reason to enable that. For historical settings here, this only matters if you're in a historical league. This setting here means that essentially the league evolves as it did in real life. You'd be literally replaying the major leagues as they came up. The historical year means that you can set whatever season it is. So if I wanted it to be 2048, I could set 2048. It wouldn't actually change or jump forward in time. We'd get statistics and everything. It would just change the year. If you want to have the league expand periodically, you can click this, or this is as the league goes. If you want to expand as it did in real life, you would click that. If you want to have player roles and positions based on their real life, you can do so. And if you want strategy to change as you advance to his, so this is basically matching what was done in the period as you go on. If you want the financial system to change to match the current year, so for example, inflation. If you want players to retire in the seasons they actually retired, you'd select that. If you want players to miss seasons, so for example, Ted Williams going off to World War II, he would be ineligible in the years he was gone. If you want to automatically import rookies historically, so this would be you get all of your rookies from the year that you're going into, you would get that. And if you want to instead do rookies from all eras, so this would be just a random draw from all Major League players ever, you would select that option. I'm not sure exactly what this does. I think this is, as you go along, you get more statistics available to match what statistics were used at the time. I would generally just recommend having your statistics set to the highest level. And recalculating, I already explained earlier as well. For the stats and AI, I would recommend having very high detail on at all times, unless you're very old school. The historical year, same as in the other thing. If you want to select different settings for how strategy is used, you would be able to do that directly from here. So if you want to use 1965 era strategies in a Major League modern team, you can do that. The typical rotation size is how many men the AI is going to use in a rotation. I believe you can only change your rotation size to within one pitcher of this, but I could be wrong. You might be able to set it to all of those. You can do it so that you set them either to highest rested, strict order, or strict rotation, occasionally starting highest rested. If you want to change how the AI likes to use their pitchers, whether or not you'd like starting pitchers in relief, you can select this. The number of typical relievers each team carries, you can change that number. But remember, if you're adjusting the number of batters or relievers being carried, you need to keep it within the roster sizes you have available. And make sure that you're adjusting stamina accordingly for the pitchers if you're decreasing or increasing the number, usually decreasing. And in the DH and non-DH leagues, you have your relievers and batters there, so you can set them differently if you would like, for example, more pitchers in a non-DH league. If you would like to disable two-way players, so Shohei Ohtani is only a pitcher, only a hitter, you can select that option there. And then you have your strategy settings, which you can adjust based on what strategies you want. I believe these are just the total number of things, but I'm not entirely sure what this is up here. I generally wouldn't suggest messing with the things on this right side, as they are very involved with the league's play style. And now we're just going to cover manager options really quickly. So from here, you can change your name if you like. You could change your date of birth. You can change your nationality and gender. And your profile picture, if you would like to have one, you can enable. If you want to have a password, which I would recommend for online leagues only, you can do that there. And then your default time zone as well. You can have your player ratings relative to a different league, which I already talked about. If you want to set your Twitter handle, you can do that here. And if you want it to remember your login, if you're logging into a league, you can do that. I think do not disturb, yeah, it literally just gives your control to the AI. And then this will essentially give you notifications and exit autoplay when these things happen. So you can set them to different conditions if you like, depending on what you want to be able to modify and control. And you can, for player injuries, set a minimum amount of time that they have to be hurt before you get a notification, and how bad their injury has to be before you are willing to get a notification. If you want to disable commissioner mode when you're in it, or enable it if you have challenge mode off, you can select that from here. Again, you can play around with the cannot be fired button as well. You can change your role if you want to manager or general manager as well. And you can set what you want to control, which can be particularly useful if you're looking to only do a couple of things. So if you want the AI to take over more things, or you want to take over with here, you can set that. That's pretty much it for the settings. That's really all I can think of at the moment. You can go into your individual team settings, of course, but I will explain that in a different video, I believe. I think that's going to be it for this one. I hope this was helpful to you guys in understanding all the very many large amount of settings, as is evidenced by my more than an hour video on it. So I'll see you on the next one.